Working in a mansion was stricter than I expected. "It wasn't my fault," I said with a determined tone as I clenched my fists. The silence of the principal's office was stifling. The air seemed thick with anticipation as I sat opposite the stern-faced principal, Mr. Thompson, who gazed at me with a mixture of disappointment and frustration. I shifted uneasily in the uncomfortable wooden chair, my eyes focused on the intricately patterned rug that lay beneath my feet. "Ben," Mr. Thompson began, his voice grave, "I'm deeply disappointed. Your behavior in Professor Hathaway's class was unacceptable." My shoulders slumped as I maintained a stony silence. Arguing with a professor and using disrespectful language is not something we tolerate here, the principal continued, his voice firm. "Your actions have consequences. Not to mention, this isn't the first time this has happened." But he started it. I tried to protest, my voice tinged with indignation. "That may be, but your reaction was inappropriate," Mr. Thompson replied evenly, his gaze unwavering. "You've been suspended permanently from this institution." The weight of the words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a lump forming in my throat, the reality of my actions sinking in. My mind raced, trying to find the right words to reverse the decision, but Mr. Thompson's expression told me it was futile. Still, I felt as if I still had some fight left in me. I leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, you heard what he called me, didn't you? Do you expect me to just sit there and say nothing? I expect you to collect your belongings and leave the premises immediately," he concluded, the finality in his voice leaving no room for argument. With a heavy heart and a sense of defeat, I rose from my seat. I collected my bag, and as I was about to walk out of the office, I turned to him. "You're all the same, you know that? You couldn't care less about me, so why should I have to care about you?" Mr. Thompson looked at me. "What are you trying to say, Ben?" I smirked. "I'm trying to say that if you don't make people feel valued, they'll give up on you. Just like your wife." His face contorted with anger. "Get out of my office right this instant." As I stepped outside the school, the piercing sunlight bore into my eyes, a contrast to the wintry chill in the air. My gaze narrowed involuntarily, attempting to adjust. Just another shitty day. Truthfully, I had tried to cheat on Mr. Hathaway's exam, however it was his fault that he never properly cared to teach the class to begin with. Not to mention the adjective he used. I curled my fingers around the familiar cold, weathered metal suspended from my neck. As far as I was concerned, that was my final attempt at high school. What was up next? I had no idea. I should probably find a job, I murmured to myself. Heading home was out of the question, at least for the time being. Then again, I wasn't in the mood to do anything. Doing nothing felt both comforting and painful, an odd sensation difficult to put into words. I sat on a nearby bench and began looking at job listings on my phone. As I was scrolling, one particular ad took me by surprise. The offered pay was unexpectedly generous, and the phrase "no experience necessary" intrigued me. The successful candidate will be responsible for managing household staff, attending to the needs of the family and guests, and ensuring the overall efficiency and elegance of the residence. Working in a mansion as a butler was the last thing that came to mind when I thought about employment. Not to mention that the mansion appeared to exist in its world, isolated by the surrounding forest. On the other hand, what if the job was already taken? Would they even taken someone like me to begin with? Only one way to find out. I filled in and applied. After a couple of minutes, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. "Hello?" I said, in my usual tone. Good day. This is Mrs. Montague, the head maid at Montague Mansion. Am I speaking with Ben? A female voice excitedly proclaimed on the other end. I was taken aback. Was this some kind of prank? Yes, good day. Pleasure to make your acquaintance, Ben. I trust you are well. We have received your application for the position here at Montague Manor, and I would like to discuss the possibility of an interview. My heart started to beat faster, and my palms grew sweaty. This was too good to be true. All right, but where should the interview take place? I asked, growing ever so nervous. Before we proceed, could you briefly share your availability for an interview within the coming week? Mrs. Montague said, paying no heed to my anxiousness. I'm available at any time. The words slipped before I could stop myself. So much for making a good impression. Excellent. If that is the case, would it be convenient for you to meet at a nearby cafe about an hour from now? I couldn't bring myself to say no. The quaint cafe nestled at the corner of the street offered a peaceful atmosphere, yet my mind was anything but calm. I fidgeted with the edges of my jacket, casting glances at my phone every few seconds. 5 minutes had already ticked by since my arrival, and Mrs. Montague was yet to appear. I ordered a coffee, more for something to do than out of any real desire for caffeine, and settled into one of the small, round tables by the window. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the delicate scent of pastries from the display case nearby, creating an odd mix that did little to calm my nerves. My fingers drummed a rhythm on the table, a nervous habit that I couldn't seem to shake. With each passing moment, my anticipation grew, mingled with a sliver of doubt. I checked my phone for the 10th time, confirming the accuracy of the address Mrs. Montague had provided for our meeting. The minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity as I anxiously scanned the faces of the incoming customers, hoping to spot Mrs. Montague among them. She mentioned I'd easily recognize her, which somewhat helped me relax as I awaited her arrival. The gentle chime of the cafe door drew my attention away from the endless parade of thoughts that had occupied my mind. In walked a woman in her late 30s, her blonde hair pulled back into a neat bun, accentuating the gracefulness of her posture. Her hazel eyes scanned the room with an air of confidence, yet her warm smile softened the severity of her uniform. She moved with an effortless grace, navigating between the tables with practiced ease. Every step seemed deliberate, as though she knew precisely where she was heading. Her uniform, though simple, bore an air of sophistication, hinting at her high station without being ostentatious. As she approached my table, her eyes met mine. I waved and her smile widened, instantly putting me at ease. As we spoke, one thing became abundantly clear to me: the job was going to be very demanding. Mrs. Montage was going to be supervising and training me herself, with the mansion providing meals and accommodation. One thing still bugged me though, and I couldn't help but ask. Why go through all this trouble of training me? I mean, don't you normally demand experience for your, establishment? Public speaking was not my thing. Mrs. Montague seemed to ponder my question for a moment before responding. If I had to say, it would be because my mistress is a very kind person. She believes anyone can work hard with efficiency given the right direction. What a picture-perfect answer that told me she didn't truly care who it was as long as they could move their hands and feet. I smirked at her. What would you do if I turned out to be a thief trying to infiltrate the premises by pretending to be interested in this job? It was only for a moment, but that one moment became crucial to me. Mrs. Montague's expression had only shifted a little bit, without breaking eye contact. We would strike you down mercilessly. My heart skipped a beat, caught off guard by the sudden change in atmosphere. Silence hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. Just as the tension seemed unbearable, Mrs. Montague chuckled. If that was the case, we would simply involve the authorities. I laughed nervously, and we continued to talk as if that awkward exchange never happened. I ended up getting the job shortly after, and as we drove in the car, my eyes wandered at the many trees we passed as the mansion was getting nearer. Mrs. Montague was silent, a contradiction to her earlier cheerful demeanor. Normally I appreciate silence, however, in this specific case, it was suffocating. That's when I noticed some odd symbols carved on the trees as we drove by. I hadn't seen anything like that before. What's up with all those weird carvings on the tree dash? She interrupted me, pointing forward. Look, Ben, the mansion is coming into view. As I looked forward, my concern dismissed, I was mesmerized by the view. I had seen it from pictures on the ad, but nothing compared to seeing it up close. An enormous mansion towered over the horizon. It looked fairly old but well maintained, with a fence surrounding it accompanied by an ominous iron gate. As we drove in, I noticed a security booth to the right nestled beside the gate. Inside, I met eyes with a man, appearing to be my age, who gave me a look I cannot explain. I guess the best way to put it would be bittersweet. What a way to welcome the new guy. I nodded at him and turned to Mrs. Montague. Quite a place you got here, Mrs. Montague. Please, call me Sophie. A sincere expression on her face. As we walked in the mansion's long halls, we passed several maids working. It was to be expected since the mansion was so vast, it would require lots of people working on it. Shortly after, Sophie led me to a heavy wooden door. Approaching the heavy wooden door, Sophie knocked lightly before gently pushing it open. The room beyond was grand, but tastefully decorated, with large windows allowing streams of natural light to filter in and illuminate the elegant space. In the center of the room sat a polished mahogany desk, and behind it sat the mistress of the mansion. She stood as a striking figure amidst the opulent office, her white hair styled in a neat and sophisticated manner, cascading down like a blanket of snow around her shoulders. Her complexion, pale and ethereal, accentuated the mesmerizing intensity of her striking blue eyes that seemed to hold a depth of wisdom beyond her years. Despite her youthful appearance, there was an undeniable air of authority that emanated from her presence. Dressed impeccably in professional attire, she exuded confidence and grace, every movement deliberate and composed, befitting the mistress of such an esteemed estate. Her blue eyes, framed by pale lashes, held a combination of warmth and shrewdness, inviting yet carrying a subtle hint of inscrutability. As our eyes locked, with a stern look, she rose from her chair. You must be Ben Ashford. She spoke with a soft yet focused tone. That's right, nice to meet you. A firm handshake followed, and we discussed the contract that Sophie had informed me of earlier. Everything seemed to be in order, so I signed it without an issue. What kept me odd was her expression or lack thereof. She hadn't smiled once during our conversation so far, not even a subtle twitch of her cold expression. She was the polar opposite of the cheerful Sophie, and I was getting the feeling I wouldn't get along with my new employer. Now, about your living quarters. She snapped me out of my thoughts. Mrs. Montague, can I make a request? I interjected, feeling a knot of nervousness building inside me. Could I possibly, choose where to stay? I could only guess what was crossing her mind since her emotionless face betrayed no hint of her thoughts. I suppose that depends on where that would be. She was not impressed. I noticed you have an attic here. Could I use that? I don't need a bed, just a pillow and blanket will do. I stammered, my gaze shifting to the floor as I struggled to maintain eye contact. They were surely judging me. probably thinking something along the lines of, why the hell did we hire this weirdo? May I ask why you wish to retire in the attic? She replied, not a change in her tone. I just enjoy sleeping in the attic, I guess. Was all I could respond, my nerves getting the better of me. Now Ben, I don't suppose you believe we can just say yes, go on right ahead. Sophie intervened, trying her best to sound polite. I don't see any harm in granting his request. Sophie, please provide him with a blanket and pillow. Sophie nodded in compliance, and I raised my head to face Mrs. Montague. I was taken aback by her goodwill, or perhaps her desire to avoid conflict. One last thing, Ben, please read through this very carefully. She handed me a small notebook with a black cover. And what is this exactly? I said as I examined its contents. Montague Manor's Rules of Conduct. Please make sure to stand by those rules at all times. Rule 1. Violence is strictly prohibited between fellow members of the mansion. Rule 2. No intentional damage to the property is allowed. Rule 3. The cellar is strictly off limits. Rule 4. You may not exit the mansion grounds without permission from the mansion head. Rule 5. Follow any given tasks to the best of your ability. I was surprised. While I was informed that the job would be challenging and strict, I never expected they would just hand out a rule sheet. The rules seemed fairly obvious. What concerned me was rule number 4. Did that mean I wouldn't be allowed to leave unless on holiday? Then again, I didn't have a place to return to. All right, I understand, but why did you give me a whole notebook? I pondered. During your stay here, you may find necessary to write down observations you deem important. Please upkeep those rules at all times. Her expression had not changed, but I felt as if I heard a small plea contained in her words. As I got up to leave, I turned around to face Mrs. Montague once more. Can I ask one last question? Why did you allow me to sleep in the attic? The question was gnawing at me, so I figured I'd ask now. Because your job is very demanding, Ben. Therefore, I want to assist you as much as possible. Although her words touched me, her stoic expression left me wondering about the sincerity behind them. Here we are, Sophie said as she led me into the room. The attic was a vast expanse filled with assorted storage boxes and antique furniture draped in dusty sheets. Sunlight streamed through a couple of small, grimy windows, creating shafts of illumination that complemented the room. Per your request, I have gone ahead and moved your things here. All right, so what's on the schedule? I asked, as I mentally prepared myself for the labor coming my way. Today, I will be taking your measurements as you will need a suit. Next, I will be giving you a tour of the mansion grounds. Lastly, in the evening you will begin with some basic tasks. She said in one fell swoop. Great, and here I thought my first day would be more relaxing. I decided to change the topic. Mrs. Montague is strict to dash. It was just then that something occurred to me. Sophie Montague and Mrs. Montague had the same surname. They didn't look anything alike, so I just made a wild guess. Are you two related by any chance? I couldn't see her expression as she stood behind me, but I felt as if I had overstepped my boundaries. I have been adopted into the Montague family, so we're not related by blood. However, Mrs. Montague regards me as her older sister. I could tell by her soft tone that she meant a lot to her. And to answer your first question, Mrs. Montague is more kind than she looks. I see. That was all I could reply to the heartfelt talk. As night came, I was assigned to take care of the east wing of the mansion. This place was even bigger than I thought. The other maids appeared to have retired for the evening, leaving me by myself. Make sure all the candles are lit by midnight, or so she said. I still had a few candles left to go, but my attention drifted to the scenery outside. A half moon illuminated the sky, accompanied by many stars. Not a single cloud could be seen. I had gazed at that very same sky hundreds of times, always by myself. Amidst the isolation that defined my life, this view never ceased to amaze me. With a little luck, I could see it every night. It wouldn't ask for anything in return, it was all mine to admire. Not yet, I whispered as I resumed my task. I took my phone out of my pocket. It was 12 a.m. and 2 candles remained unlit. Oh, I said, as I realized my task had technically failed. Well, it's not like they'll mind if I light the remaining candles a few seconds after midnight, right? I glanced around me, a small grin forming on my face. As expected, the hall was empty. Nobody would ever know of my little error. Or so I thought. As I walked towards the candles, I froze in my tracks. Behind them, a mass of darkness appeared to be forming in the corner of the hall. The darkness seemed to pulse, growing denser and more palpable. Its shape appeared to be molded into a humanoid figure standing over 2 meters tall, with multiple faces twisting and contorting as they traversed its forming body. I was unable to move. My heart felt as if it would break free from my chest. A cold sweat trickled down my back as the hairs on my neck stood on end. The creature started creeping on all fours, but it didn't make a sound. Its eerie presence filled the hall, suffocating the air around me. It was as if the whole world had gone silent. What in God's good name was going on? I attempted to rationalize the situation. Was this some kind of prank they played on the new guy? Surely it had to be. If that was the case, that was one hell of a costume. As I was calming myself down, a buzzing noise became apparent. A mosquito had entered the room through the open window, and the dead silence of the hall, even its small buzzing, was enough to disrupt this silence. Snap! A third hand came out of its back and instantly killed the mosquito. At that moment, I realized that thing wasn't human. Panic started to rise within me once more. I had to get the hell out of here, right this instant. This thing was going to kill me if I didn't. Yet, why hadn't it attacked me already? Was it toying with me? It wasn't even facing my direction, simply glancing around as if looking for something. That something must be me. Perhaps it was blind and could only use sound to find me. I had to bet on that possibility, otherwise, I was going to end up like that mosquito. I forced myself to regain a small bit of composure, my legs trembling as I took slow, deliberate steps backward, never breaking eye contact with that monstrous form. I placed my full concentration on resisting the urge to run, simply taking one slow and careful step at a time. At this point, I had put a bit of distance between me and that thing. I felt determined, as a glimmer of hope flickered in my mind. Maybe I can get out of this in one pie. The sharp buzz of my phone interrupted my thoughts. Someone was calling me. In response, the creature sprinted at me with full force. I started to make a run for it, adrenaline flowing through my veins. In my haste, I stumbled over the mat and crashed to the floor, the impact jolting through my body. Gasping for breath, I lifted my gaze only to find the monstrous entity looming over me, viciously attacking my phone. With my escape route blocked, I began to despair. How the hell was I going to survive? I couldn't jump out of the window at this height. I grit my teeth. What the fuck was I going to do? Light the candles. A desperate voice screamed from outside. The creature averted its attention to the window. Light the candles? What was that going to accomplish against that thing? Still, I didn't have a choice, so I slowly crawled towards the remaining candles. The voice continued to shout, effectively covering the sound of my footsteps. As I reached the candles, with trembling hands, I lit up the first one. The creature suddenly shifted its attention back to me, charging at me with inhuman speed. In the last second, I lit up the final candle, and the creature vanished into thin air. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. There was no time for a break. I had to get out of this fucking mansion. As I ran outside, I came across a familiar face, the security guard from earlier. His countenance was a mixture of concern and determination. "We have to get the hell out of here. This place is dangerous," I pleaded. A hint of sadness lay in his brown eyes. "I'm afraid we can't do that." "Please listen." Recognizing his voice, I realized he was the one who aided me during the candle ordeal. Anger started flowing through me, and I interrupted him. "And why not? Let's take the car and get the hell out of here, or do you want to stay until that fucking thing comes back?" I shouted, desperate to escape this godforsaken mansion. "If we go out in the woods right now, we're dead," he said, attempting to calm me down. "Then call the police. Do something, please." "What the hell do you want from me?" I yelled. He put his hands on my shoulders. "I want you to trust me. I don't have much time to explain, but I'll tell you this. If you want to survive, continue your work as if nothing happened tonight." I was shocked. This man was insane if he thought I was just going to pretend I didn't almost die. "So you just expect me to go back in there like no dash yes. Please trust me. If possible, come see me tomorrow in the booth. I might have something to help you out with." A hint of desperation resonated in his tone. I was speechless. How the hell was I supposed to trust this guy just like that? Yet, he did help with that monster. After a couple of seconds, I reluctantly decided to go back in. I had no tasks left, so I rushed straight to the attic. I slumped against the wall, drawing the blanket around myself. My eyes darted around the dim attic, searching for any lurking threat. Shadows danced ominously, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if that thing still lingered in the darkness. Mrs. Montague, Sophie, and that security guard. They were my enemies, and they wanted to see me suffer. I truly couldn't understand why they hated me so much. Were they just looking for a sacrifice or something? Did they enjoy deceiving me with this work opportunity? I had no idea what was going on anymore. I gripped the old medal hanging from my neck. Should I just end it all? I wanted to at least have the freedom to die on my terms, not other people's. Then again, there still could be a way out of this death trap, and I was going to find that, no matter what.